My most memorable moments was really when I've been involved with getting set for what we called the Living Last Supper. And the Living Last Supper was a play that we actually put on by church members. It was set up to look on the stage like Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper painting. So there were 13 church members that posed as all of the disciples, and it was really great. We opened the curtain, it looked awesome. Everyone was in a frozen pose just like that. And then each one, as they were spotlighted, would tell a little bit of their stories about their relationships with Jesus as that disciple. And it was a fantastic play. It incorporated a lot of the people from the church. We really had a great time doing it.
Yeah, it's recording right now.
Oh dear, okay. I'm Mary Ellen Ekman, and we joined the church in about 1981. I think we moved to this area in 1979 and visited a number of churches in the area before we decided on Yardley United Methodist Church. And the big draw here was Paul Corson, who was the pastor at the time. He started the youth ski trips up to Shawnee Mountain. My daughter was in high school in the 80s, and she participated in those trips, and I decided to give skiing another shot. I had not skied in about 20 years, and I thought, well, I'm going to give it another try. I was in my 40s then, and ever since then I've been trying to go at least once or twice a year. And when I retired from my full-time job in 2017, the next weekend I was with the youth group on their ski trip to the Poconos, and I went again this year, so I'm going to try to keep doing that as long as I can, at least once or twice a year.
Makes you feel a little youthful, right?
Yeah.
Not only being around the kids, but being able to ski still is
Yeah,
impressive,
yeah. I'm still able to get on the lifts and get down without. I don't usually fall. I take the green slopes or the blue slopes. I avoid the black diamonds. Tim took me down one of those once, and I thought, never again.
My name is Joyce White Lee, and I've been here my entire life, except for maybe 14 years when I went away to nursing school at age 18. Worked a while and then went to college at Boston University, met my husband, married, lived in New York for 7 years, in Brooklyn for 7 years, and then back to Yardley. My mother just happened to find a house that we could afford in Yardley, surprising.
Yeah, that is
because
surprising.
my mother lives here. My parents lived here.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I grew up in this church. It wasn't always here on Scamble's Corner. It was down in Yardley, where the Yardley Town Center is now. That was the church's footprint, the parking lot and the church. And that was torn down, and the cornerstone of this church says 1959. So I would say that it was maybe 1958. Really, is that when I came back, this was in the late 60s, early 70s, we had all of this social action going on in this country, and even here in Yardley. So there was a group in Yardley called the Yardley Community Action Committee, and the head of that committee was Millard Mitchell. At that time in Yardley, we had a couple streets that were really mostly the houses on the streets were very small and in rather poor condition, and most of them were rented. But then there was a man a contractor who bought those houses and renovated them, and the people that lived there, many of the black families that lived there, moved to Trenton. But I'm getting ahead of my story, because when I came back, Yardley Community Action was in full swing. Can't remember them all, but Marge Wallace was one of them. And Yardley Community Action was organized to identify the problems in the Yardley community. Problems, social problems that perhaps we could fix. People, not just the people from our church, but people in the whole organization, which was also made up of community people. So we had things like a Yardley tutoring program, and what we did was to receive the kids who were up College Avenue in the school at the top of the hill. We would receive them after school and help them with their homework. One of those students graduated from our program and went on to college. We even helped, this church helped with tuition for a while. So that was a real success. Those kinds of things excite me when I see those kinds of, talk about renewal and transformation. That was happened not just for her, but for us as a church.
Okay, I was also active in United Methodist Women when that was going on. That disbanded some time ago, but I was in charge of planning the meetings at one point while I was in that. And I arranged a field trip to the Groves landfill, the Otter Recycling Center in Bristol, and the Trenton Area Soup Kitchen and Isles in Trenton. Those two are in Trenton. And it was quite an interesting trip for all of us who went on that. A number of women went. And when that was over, Joyce Lee and Marge Wallace, I think, were very instrumental in getting a program set up with TASK, Trenton Area Soup Kitchen, and it's still going today. They start once a month, the second Wednesday of every month. A group goes over and helps to serve lunch at the Trenton Area Soup Kitchen. And if you noticed in the bulletin, there's also a list of things that the TASK can use. So that's a program that's still going.
First job I ever had here, like the first assignment, when on my first day here was Cassie, the administrative assistant, had gotten a new answering machine.
Yeah.
So she literally handed me the box with the answering machine in it, told me how to figure out how to use it, and then teach her. That was my first job.
That's probably pretty simple. The reason I'm laughing is because I had been a member of the church for maybe a month, and I got a call from Pastor Bob asking him if he could come by the house for a visit. And so we invited him over to dinner and got to know him and had a great time. He was there for a few hours. But at the end of the discussion, he asked me if I ever thought about serving on a committee. And the next thing I knew, I was president of the stewardship committee, and I was like the newest member of the church. So again, I was extremely blessed that there were a lot of long-term people on stewardship, knew what it was all about. I had been involved in stewardship before with other churches, but nothing like this, so it was a little bit different, and I didn't know anyone. So, I mean, three people in particular, Bob Smith, Joyce Lee, and Pam McQuarrie. I mean, those are the three stalwarts on the stewardship committee, and they've been doing it for so long. They just made it very, very easy, you know, to teach you the ins and outs. And my first assignment was raising $40,000 for the fellowship hall, which I didn't know anybody. So walking around trying to introduce yourself and trying to encourage people to invest in fellowship hall was a bit challenging in the beginning, but people were very, very receptive. It was very successful, and fellowship hall turned out to be beautiful when they got done with it.
A family joined the church. Ross, I can't think of their names right now. That's terrible. They moved here, and when they were introduced at the reception after church for new members, they said they were from Baltimore, Maryland, and lo and behold, this fella's dad had taught Lori, our daughter, in Sunday school at Faith Presbyterian Church in Baltimore.
Small world.
Yeah, and we became quite good friends. My husband did some painting for them, and then they had triplets. 3 girls were born, and then they eventually moved to the Chicago area, but we really were amazed to see that they joined this church.
It just so happened that one family from Baltimore and another family from Baltimore
we did
intersected.
Yeah, and we
and you knew each other in some respect.
Yeah, down in Baltimore. Yeah. His dad had taught my daughter in Sunday school at Faith Presbyterian.
At the end of my 8th grade school year, I was bit by a tick and I found the bullseye about a week later. We all know what that means in PA. It's one of the worst Lyme disease state in the country, I think, at this point. It affects people differently, the disease, and there's different severities of it. Mine was very bad. I was extremely fatigued. I would be sleeping multiple hours a day, like almost 20 hours a day, and still feeling like I hadn't slept. But during that time, it was my calling, the mission trip that I love and long to be at almost all the time. I loved helping out people, and I was worried I wasn't going to be able to go on it since I was suffering from Lyme's. And now I can't wait to have the next 3 years to be a leader and help out people like I have been helped out. It's a definite shift. I was actually a few months before I was on the student table, and they were talking about one membership team saying that we were going to need a position filled for my calling, and I was like, no, not me, I'll just sit back here, leave me out. But during that mission trip experience and how they helped me out beyond any imagine I would ever think of, changed my companion completely, and really inspired me. I'm back to Renewal, but I still have my inspiration to become my calling.
Yeah.
3 youth in the back seat. The car was struck, or the car actually ran a stop sign and was hit by a log truck, and everybody was severely injured. And I was working in Philadelphia at the time. I'll never forget it. It was like 7 o'clock at night, and I got a phone call from Michael Gordon telling me that Laura was in an ambulance helicopter being out unconscious and being transported to Portland, Maine, and they didn't have any other information. So I was devastated. 15 minutes later, I got a phone call, be at the Northeast Philadelphia airport. By 9:30, we have a flight going up. And the spouses of the adults and parents of the other kids that were hurt were on that plane. And we got a ride up to the airport. So I was in the hospital room by midnight, by 12 o'clock in Portland, which was unbelievable to see her. She was still unconscious at the time, but it was still very frightening. But the way the church community rallied around the group was outstanding.
Yeah.
You know, other moments like that the church rallied around was the Bray family. Becky Bray was a high school student. She passed away. She had a muscular problem, and she deteriorated over a very short period of time and passed away. And I'll never forget the memorial service in the sanctuary. There was a severe storm going on that night. Lights went out, but we had the whole sanctuary was lighted with candles. It was standing room only, and it was an extremely moving tribute to her. That was another thing that sticks out in my mind.
The kids from the Pennsbury School. So anyway, we settled here, and our membership class, we came in 65, and then we joined in, I think it was February or something, in 66.
Do you think this church is partly the reason why your own kids are so
Absolutely.
connected to the faith?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I do, especially Well, my son goes to church every Sunday. And my 3 children were married here. I don't know if I mentioned that.
Oh, really?
They're all married here in this church.
That's wonderful.
And my oldest daughter, she and her husband helped establish a church in Voorhees, New Jersey, a Methodist church. And now they have that church is building a church in another town that's right near Voorhees. Now I've lost the name of it. I mean, they have really done outreach with Methodist church. And then my other daughter, Diane, her husband, and his later years, well, he's not that old there, but he's an ordained Methodist minister, and he has a church in Chester, Pennsylvania, as a second career. So yeah, Methodism is, and also when my husband Bob and I were touring England, we made a point of going to John Wesley's home,
wow.
and the Episcopal church where his father was priest.
Yeah.
So yeah, you know.
Anything from that trip that you remember of John
Well,
Wesley and all that?
I knew a lot of, John Wesley was ingrained in my training when I was a child, a young person. And it was just, very, very, important and influential in my life. And especially to see the home where he grew up in and the church where his father was and that he evidently had also, worshiped. So I guess that's it.
Well,
my husband was extremely active in the church, and it's really him that should be the one who's being interviewed. I sort of just followed him, and he was serious. And I'm kind of crazy. Well, I don't mind sharing that. I guess I was 16. May have been 17. May have had a birthday. I went to Bennett College, which is in Greensboro, North Carolina, and he was going to A&T, which is now a university and has grown. He and a friend came on the campus because they wanted to see the new freshmen. And back in the day, you had to be introduced. You were not just, hey. So there's always someone in your group who knows everybody and everything. She, of course, had only been there about the same length of time that I had been. And when they came on the campus, I said, oh, I'm going to marry that guy. And she said, I know him, I'll introduce you. So she introduced me. And he happened to have been with the person who was the best man at our wedding. And he was also a part of our 50th wedding anniversary, which some of the members of the church were invited to, and it was great. It was really great.
That's wonderful.
Yes, so I met him umpteen years ago. And what was really wonderful about him, I was ready to get married, but he was going to Korea, and he did not want us to be married until he returned, because he didn't have any idea what shape he would be in when he came back. So he said, we will wait. So there you go.
Thank you very much. No, I love that. That was
And another interesting part that you might like to hear about is our daughter's wedding.
absolutely. Yeah.
She was married in this church, and she married a Jewish fellow. And he and his family were not real active at the time in their synagogue, but they did ask their rabbi if he would be willing. They wanted to have both religious traditions represented in the wedding. And they asked their rabbi if he would be willing to come to our church and participate in that, and he was not willing to do that. So our pastor at the time was Charles Evans, and he knew a woman rabbi, Julie Greenberg, quite well, and he said, well, I think I can get a rabbi who would be willing to do that for you. And they he contacted Julie, and she said yes. And the two of them officiated at our daughter's wedding, and they had, my daughter made a chuppah, which is the canopy that's used in the Jewish wedding, and they did some of the traditions, the Jewish traditions in the wedding, and all of the people from Mike's side of the family felt that our church was very welcoming to them. And they have maintained a relationship with Julie in the naming ceremonies for both of their sons, and she actually did the funeral service for Mike.
For our marriage, you know. And the interesting thing is, at that time period, when I grew up in a Catholic church, was heavily involved with the church. You know, kind of as you get older, you know, in college, sometimes you move away a little bit. Some people do, not everybody, but I did. And then I really got back into the church as I got a little older and more mature, and realized that, you know, I wanted to, you know, get closer to God and start having kids. And so I lost my Irish clotter ring jogging to a basketball game. Okay. And so that was a little upsetting, I guess, for myself and my wife, but we said, let's look for a ring. And at that point we had come to the church and were heavily involved. And somehow this cross spinning ring was on a website. So these are all little crosses that are on here. So they're all crosses. Yeah. And it spins. And I don't know why we did this, but I mean, obviously I was looking for more of a Christian, you know, wedding ring than the Irish clotter ring. So we bought this. And it reminds me, I like having it on because when I think, I'll spin. And when I spin, I see the cross. And it just makes me think more of God. And you know, when you make tough decisions at work, or you know, sometimes you have tough personnel decisions and stuff, and you're thinking about it, and I think about God. And you know, it's a physical marker on my body, you know, that reminds me of God. So I've lost this many times. This is probably the fourth one. At one point, my wife bought two, so I'd have a backup one as I continue to lose it. But it's probably the greatest symbol that I wear on